The streets of Dhaka, after a month of deadly violence, are absolutely jubilant. We've seen hundreds of thousands of students, of protesters out on the streets. They were getting ready this morning to really gear up for another round of protests. But what we've heard just a few minutes ago is that Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has taken off in a military helicopter towards India to seek safe shelter. We've got multiple local and international media reporting that she has resigned. Now, what this means, and we're also waiting for the army chief to address the nation in about half an hour, an hour's time. So what this means is potentially, effectively, the army has taken over and the Prime Minister has fled. She's been, in power for a total of 20 years. She's the longest serving female Prime Minister in the world. This is absolutely massive. It follows on from a month of deadly protests. The death toll has crossed 300. And what started off initially as anti-quota protest, a lack of sort of frustration around a lack of stable jobs and high quotas, students really wanted those jobs to be merit-based. What started as, a protest about that turned into frustrations about Ms Hasina's, seemingly what they called an authoritarian regime. So, things are going to move really quickly over the next few hours, but for the moment, there's jubilation.
Yeah, so Meghna, what can you tell us about those initial protests and that particular issue of job quotas? Who were the jobs reserved for and what were the actual quotas?
Yeah, so these are basically government jobs, seen by many people in Bangladesh as the most stable jobs in the country. And, until just a few weeks ago, about 56% of those jobs were reserved for multiple special groups. About 30% of them were for the families of those who fought in Bangladesh's independence war against Pakistan in 1971. And of course, as we know, Ms Hasina's party, the party of her father, the Awami League, were the ones who fought in that war. So these quotas were seen as unfavourably favouring, those who were part of the Awami League. And, the rest of the quotas were sort of made up of, those from disadvantaged backgrounds or, whether or not you were disabled. So, these were really, and the whole fight was about trying to make them merit-based. Those quotas were scaled back just a few weeks ago, but then the protests escalated into frustrations against Ms Hasina's government and the violence, the deadly violence that had taken place over the last month.
Yeah, and what are those broader issues facing the country that this protest, which initially started out as a protest over quotas, that this protest morphed into?
Yeah, look, we were there in January to cover the elections and we could really feel a sense of frustration, high cost of living, a lack of jobs, a lack of opportunity for education. These were sort of the initial frustrations, and then what compiled onto that was really what is seen as an authoritarian crackdown by Ms Hasina's government. We're talking about, accusations of forced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, the paramilitary and the police shooting unarmed civilians. This sort of really came to the forefront over the last month.
And what can you tell us about the elections? Were they seen as legitimate or not?
Yeah, look, the elections were, first of all, boycotted by the main opposition party, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. And, at that time there was major concerns about tens of thousands of arrests because of those boycotts. It was seen as a, one-sided election. We heard when we were there, we met, candidates that were really dummy candidates. So, it seemed like a joke. And, it's really that frustration over the last few months that has really spilled onto the streets.
And what role has the military played in Bangladesh's democratic history, and to what extent is Bangladesh seen as a legitimate democracy?
Yeah, look, historically, in terms of when it comes to Ms Hasina's government, the army has, generally really supported her government. But, over the last, the government has accused, has faced allegations of being an authoritarian regime. You've got an army that's accused of really cracking down on dissent, cracking down on oppositions. And, she's been accused of using these sorts of state agencies to really, suppress dissent. So it's been like a long and troubled relationship, at least with the citizens of Bangladesh. And, this is, over the last month, what we've seen is that Bangladesh is really, they're really sort of fighting for their democracy and what they see as, an authoritarian regime.
Are you surprised at the pace at which this seems to have happened? That she's suddenly resigned and flown out of the country?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, until this morning, I couldn't have told you this was going to happen. But as is the case with these things, it's sort of people power. When you start seeing hundreds of thousands of people outnumber military personnel and police, government officials, when people start outnumbering these sorts of authorities, you never know what's going to happen. And in this case, we're hearing thousands of protesters have even entered the Prime Minister's residence. So, it's moved very quickly, but it's been a long-going fight for them, months and years of frustrations against this regime that's come to a head today.
And Meghna, just finally, because I can understand that you've probably got a fair bit to do now since this story is unfolding pretty dramatically, now that presumably the opposition will step into the void, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. We've got the military chief speaking in 20 minutes or so. Can you tell us anything about the history of relations between that party and the military? So look, the BNP, they have been in power previously. I think, like a lot of countries, I mean, you need to, in a country like Bangladesh, you need to have a good relationship with the army to rule the country, in sort of a peaceful way, quote unquote. So I think moving forward, whoever does take over and fills this void of power, they will very much need to have, the support of the army.